We've come to meet Tom, a 25-year-old truck driver from Birmingham. Unfortunately, in April 2022, Tom was involved in a road traffic accident due to an undiagnosed illness. Lapsing at the wheel, we've come to meet Tom and his fiancée Anna to hear their story of love, tragedy and loyalty.
So my name's Tom Crook. I'm from Redditch. Recently moved to Birmingham about a year ago. 25 years old.
So my name's Anna, 26, originally from Redditch. We moved to Birmingham about a year ago. Met Tom at a car meet. I was in my cousin's car, we were faffing about. I think one of the lads disconnected her battery because we were playing a shitty song that he didn't want to listen to. And then I leant over from the driver's side to the passenger side and Thomas broke my thong because it was on show and he'd seen it.
I mean, of a younger age, 18, 19, I used to, like to go truck shows and whatnot, be around my mates with trucks and stuff, go on days out with the trucks and whatnot. Used to go to a lot of car meets, used to enjoy a lot of car related things, you know what I mean, go to track days or just normal bloody car shows, like, you know what I mean. So that's how I met Anna at a car show, local car meet. Yeah, and it stemmed from there. We started talking, went out on a night out, and rest history. We're still together now.
The first year of our relationship we were out every single weekend, bank holiday, and then it just kind of kindled from there. I went to Ireland for 2 weeks for my sister's wedding, came back, his mum and everyone went on holiday. And he was like, check Facebook. And I was like, okay. And he's like, in a relationship with Anna? And I was like, that's not how you ask someone, you know. And then, yeah, 7.5 years later, I'm still here. I never left.
Before I passed my HGV test, I was a plant mechanic. I was out on the road. I was doing 60, 70 hours a week, Monday to Saturday. I mean, early mornings, late finishes. Just working, constantly working, save as much money as we can. Refraining from spending money. Like we said, like we weren't going on holiday. Save as much money as we can to try to buy the house. And yeah, it was a hard 6 months or so, but we managed to save enough money to get the house and whatnot. But that's how we grafted hard for it. Finally bought the house. Yeah, it was a blessing really. Nice to get our own space finally again.
I used to work at William Hill. I was a manager at the bookies. Absolutely hated it there. So went and got a new job, which was commission based. So I knew then that I was going to work my hardest to save money, as much money as I could, so we could have our own place. We were currently living with his mum, and there was me, Tom, her, his sister, and then she met her partner. So then there was like all of us adults in like a 3-bed house. It was just too much. We then moved into my uncle's. He had 2 small children, absolutely beautiful children. But again, living with someone else's children is very hard. So I think that's like the main thing that made us knuckle down. Like, we need our own space. You know, we had a flat previously, but it still wasn't enough. We wanted to own our own home. So we just worked really hard. Tom worked every single hour under the sun he could. I tried to sell as many cars as I could. So yeah, and then we made our dream a reality and bought our first home.
So I work for a company called DC Merits in Gloucester. They're a heavy haulage firm. I've known of them for about 4 or 5 years from when I used to work as a plant mechanic. They used to move all our kit around. Yeah, like I finally picked up the courage to leave my old job and go do the job I wanted to always do. Went and spoke to them and they were happy to take me on board, give me as much training as I needed and let me really experience being able to move the heavy kit that I've always wanted to do. Again, it's a small family run business. They're a really close family. I mean, the father and the 4 daughters and whatnot. It was a really good company to work for, it is. It really is. I mean, I could see myself working there till I retire. Such a close group of people. Everyone's all good group of lads, and being so interested in trucks and stuff and keeping them clean and doing stuff to them makes me, you know what I mean, it's more of a hobby, not a job. You know what I mean, it's a love for it, and like I say, being able to do it with a good group of people as well is amazing. It really is a good job. Yeah, so I woke up in the truck like every morning around about 6 o'clock, 6:30. I woke up, felt fine. I was staying at my old company where I used to work for before, prior to DC Merit. And I was only travelling to Gloucester, so only about an hour away, and I weren't due to be there till 8 o'clock. So I had a chat with a couple of the lads who I used to work with. Then I left there about 7 o'clock. Felt alright, rang Anna when she woke up. Had a bit of a headache around about 7:30. Then by the time I got to Gloucester, I just felt really ill. Like really, I know I felt cold. I was wearing my hoodie, had my hood up. Didn't want to get out of the truck. Didn't want to talk to anyone. I met another driver there because it was a 2-driver job. He said, like, you don't look well, Tom, at all, and I didn't feel well. I ended up throwing up at the back of the truck. So he rang the office and said, we need to chat. We need to like swap Tom out. He needs to go home. He's not very well. So about 15 minutes or 20 minutes later, I got back in the truck and went to sleep because I generally wasn't well at all. They woke me up by banging on the door, and one of the lads from the office was there to drive the truck. And he's like, Jesus, Tom, you don't look well at all. He said, you get yourself off home. So yeah, I just grabbed my bag, didn't even talk to anyone, just grabbed my bag, got in the van, and just started driving home. And that was it, yeah. Last thing I remember was getting on the motorway. And then, yeah, 6 days later I woke up in the coma, so yeah, it wasn't nice.
I want to say about 6 months, 7 months that we've been in the house before the whole accident. Tom had just got his new job, and we were really scared because he was working away Monday to Friday. He didn't know how I was going to be, because I don't like being on my own. But my cousin was actually living here, so we thought this is the best time for him to go and work away because I've still got someone here with me. So he went and worked away. I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved not having him here Monday to Friday. My house was tidy. I ate what I wanted. It was absolutely brilliant. And then on the 7th of April, I'd gone to work. Spoke to him at 7:30 in the morning, as we normally did every single day. Normal life routine, that's what we did every single morning. 7:30 we had a phone call while I walked Lola. And then gone to work. We usually had a phone call about 10:30. He just didn't answer, which is normal sometimes if he's on site, left his phone there. So they were all normal activities. And then I got a phone call it's about 12:15. I was going on lunch with my friend. And it come up at Gloucester. My phone was on my lap. And she said, are you going to answer that? And my exact words were, if I answer that, my whole day is going to change. It come up Gloucester. Sorry. It was his work. They told me that he'd been in an accident. They didn't know where he was. They didn't know if he was alive. They hadn't heard anything from anyone. I then said, you need to find him. I need to come to you. I don't know where he is. And they said, we'll try and find for you. So the van had a tracker on. They tracked it, and he was like Cannock way, up that way. They didn't know why he was up there, how he got there. So I went straight to my mum's house. Tried to get hold of everyone, got hold of Nikki. They met us there, my sister and everyone. My dad come home from work, and it was about 2.5 hours until we knew where he was. We were ringing round police stations, hospitals, trying to find him. One of Tom's friends, because they're constantly up and down the motorway, he heard about an accident. So he stopped off, I think it junction 12 of the M6. I think that was where the accident was. He stopped. It was a massive pile up. He completely blocked off the roundabout. Got out, give the policeman my number, said, look, that's her partner, you know, he's in the van and everything. Give him my number, and about 20 minutes later the police phoned Nicky, and said that they'd had to put him in an induced coma on the side of the road because of how restless he was getting. That they were taking him to Stoke Royal, and that he wasn't in very good condition. He had a temperature of 43.9, so they'd pumped him full of antibiotics. And they didn't know what the infection was, but they knew it was an infection because of how high his temperature was. So then we all just piled in every single car. Victoria's car, my dad's car, everyone was going up to Stoke. We were on the way up there.
I can't really remember too much about that day. It was kind of vague. I mean, it's only from what I've been told, really, from like my mum and Anne and my fiance.
So we got to the hospital. They took us. It was an absolute nightmare trying to get there. We'd parked on the main road, and it was absolutely hammering it down. I've never seen rain like that. But the way that we'd gone like off-roading as such. And poor Nikki, she's not the best on her feet. So we made her go down an embankment, which was like this. It was awful. Torrential rain. But we'd gone right next to the helicopter pad. And this helicopter was trying to take off. It was just absolutely awful. So they took us into like the back entrance instead of going through A&E. So Nikki went in. We were still in limbo waiting. Me, my mum and his sister didn't know what was happening still. Then we went through to... We got told to go through to A&E. I was on the phone to his best friend, trying to get hold of him. I'd been trying to get hold of him all day. Finally got hold of him. I was having a conversation with him, trying to briefly go through what had happened and just, you know, that we were here. As soon as we found out anything, we'd let him know. And all I remember is my mum shouting at me, saying that the nurse needed me, or the receptionist. And I've never been able to remember Tom's birthday. And if you ask me now, I probably would still get it wrong. But in that moment, I just completely lost my temper. And I did apologise to her straight after. And I just completely lost my temper, shouted at her, told him his date of birth. And then we got took into a room that she said, we're going to take you into like a private room. And I said, I don't want to go in there because, you know, if I go in there, you're putting me in there to set me up, to tell me something bad. I don't want to go in there. She was like, it's the best thing for you to do, you know, if there's quite a few of you come in. So she put me at ease a little bit. We went into the room. I think there was about 12 of us in total at the end. Nikki was still still with Tom, in, I don't know if it was like an A&E room. I don't know if it was like an ICU. It was, you know, I don't know where he was. But so he was in this room. Nikki was still with him at this point, and then she came through, called us in, and he was just lay there. Tubes everywhere. He was covered in blood. We think he'd popped his nose in the accident, so that was the reason for the blood. But seeing him like that was absolutely awful. For everyone. So me and his sister went in with Nikki. And then my mum came in after. The only person that didn't go through to see him was my dad. My dad said he doesn't want to see his favourite like that. But then his two friends, Tom and Saf, they arrived first, out of the friendship groups. They arrived first and they came in. Saf completely broke down to me. I think I'd kind of got to the point where I'd composed myself a little bit, and realised that I needed to, even though it was hard for me, it was hard for everyone else. So me and Saf had a little cry together. And then by the time his best friend got there, I was kind of not fully composed, but more better. So he completely everyone was just breaking down crying. You know, seeing someone that you love in that sort of state isn't great. then they told us that they were transferring him to ICU, and they were doing a lumbar puncture to rule out meningitis because of his temperature was so high. So we were sat with him for a while. He was in his own room, and we were speaking to the nurses, and they were all lovely there at Stoke. Then we had to leave. We left about 9:30. So I think we originally got there about 3 o'clock. We left about 9:30, 9:45 to make the journey home. And then we come here, got some stuff, got the dog, and then we went to Nicky's, and I stayed at Nicky's for a few days. That I was going to lose him. The first few days, really, thought that I was going to lose him. Part of me was sat there thinking, we've just bought a house, you selfish bastard. You've not got life insurance. I'm screwed. Just everything. I had to think about everything. As selfish as it was, because he was lying there in a coma, I had to think, I'm not going to be going to work. I'm going to have to take holiday because I can't afford not to be paid. I've got to see to the dog. I've got to make sure that she's okay while I'm back and forth from the hospital. I've got to make sure that his mum's okay, that his sister's okay, that his friends are okay. So I didn't have time as such in the day to kind of just sit back and think, like, how this is affecting me as a person. Because, Nikki will agree, me and her both, everyone was thinking like that. But me and Nikki were trying to be as strong as possible to be there for everyone else. The evenings were the worst because I sat with my own thoughts, thinking about what I'm going to do if I lose him. I'll never find anyone else like him. He's a 1 in a million. That's the end of our little family. Just everything. It makes, in a way as such, not that I did ever think that, but it makes you think that if he's not going to be there, then I don't want to be there. It's almost like a Romeo and Juliet kind of thing. It was just really, really hard to go, we're still so young, to go through something like that. We had amazing support from friends and families, but it was still really, really hard. Like, I opened up to Nikki a lot about how I was feeling, but it was hard to kind of go in 100% because, that's her son, she's going through the same thing. So it was really, really hard. The person I opened up to the most was probably Saf, because I lived there for 3 weeks. Neither of us slept. None of us slept for about 48 hours. And then I said to Nikki, I can't go home, but I can't also sleep on your sofa for however long he's going to be there. So we've got our own room at our friend's house. So me and Lola went and moved in there. And I'd slept from 12 till 8, and it was the longest that I'd slept since the accident. And I opened up to her a lot about how I was feeling. So she was a massive rock for me. Everyone was, but Saf more than anyone, because she was there day and night, every hour, every minute, because I was living there. But it just makes you, and I say this to Tom, and I don't think he quite understands when I say it. I said, I loved you, I've always loved you. However, when something like this happens, you don't understand how much you actually love someone. I said, coming close to losing you was the worst thing that I'll ever go through. But I think he thinks like, you didn't love me. No, I did. Just this made me realise how much I actually love you. So yeah, it just makes you feel really shitty.
I had a bleed on the brain. I had a massive lump at the back of my head just beyond my ear. I fractured my back in the accident. Can't remember. Probably the meningitis, really. They've done more of the damage with losing my hearing a couple of weeks later. I had a cut on my leg. It was only about an inch or two long scar. Boy, I must have cut it on something in the interior of the van. But yeah, it was. Don't really know much about it, to be honest. It's just what the hospital keep telling me and what Anna and my mum keep telling me. 10 weeks and 1 day I was in hospital for. So it was a long period of time. It was a lot of time that I didn't think I was going to be coming out anytime soon. Especially when I got transferred to Birmingham. I didn't think, I mean, every week going by was still the same. It was the same answers from the doctors. They wasn't sure where the infection was. I just generally felt like I weren't going to be out of hospital anytime soon. That's when I realised I was more ill than I actually thought I was.
When he was in ICU, we had to book in times that we could go and see him because we were only allowed in there for a period of time. I think it was an hour or 2 hours. Sometimes they let us stay longer. But the day after the accident, we drove up there. And they kind of went through, they told us that it was meningitis, it was strep B meningitis, and that they'd started him on a course of antibiotics. So they'd done that. He sustained a head injury. He had a bleed on the brain, so they were also monitoring that. And then he'd had a little cut on his leg where they think like a piece of glass had punctured his skin or something like that. It was quite deep. Didn't require stitches or anything, but it was still fairly bad. I don't believe at that point his back was mentioned, because he was in a coma, he couldn't really tell us. So it was just the meningitis and the brain bleed that they were monitoring more in Stoke. Then once he'd come out of the coma, they tried to wake him up. I think it was about 3 days in. My phone had gone completely dead. I was on the way back I think I'd gone shopping with Saf, and I was on the way back, and because my Apple Watch is cellular, luckily enough, the call come through on my Apple Watch, but it was via FaceTime, because he had his iPad there. We'd set him up with his iPad, so he could FaceTime us. So we absolutely raced to Nicky's, got up to Nicky's, quickly charged my phone. He'd come on FaceTime, we were all crying. I think his exact words were, "Stop crying, I'm still here, shut up." And then, obviously, we were very excited for the next day. I think Nicky then phoned them about 8 o'clock or 7:30, 8 o'clock the next morning, and he really struggled. They had to put him back into the coma, but they'd only done a very light sedation. So he got put back into that. He was still stirring, so we talked to him, and his eyes would flutter, and he'd, try and make funny noises. He'd try and cough and stuff like that while he was in the coma. And funnily enough, I think it was on Thursday, I was sat on the sofa, and I was just in a daydream, and I started crying. Tom was like, "You okay?" And I was like, "I think it's just a bit of PTSD." One thing I do mainly remember from him being in the coma was them trying to make him cough. So he had a tube down his throat, and they'd basically just almost like ramming it down his throat to get him to cough so he could hack up all the crap that was on his chest. But something like that, because it looked so uncomfortable. He looked like he was in pain while they were doing it. So that's the main thing that's kind of stuck with me, them making him cough, and it's something so silly, but that stuck with me, and I always think about that because of how uncomfortable it looked. So they'd make him do that and stuff. And then I think it was 2 days after they tried to wake him up, I said to Nicky, I was like, "Why don't we play him some music, see if we can get him to react a little bit?" So our current favourite artist, which still is but was more back then, was Luke Combs. He's American country singer, and he'd done a cover of Ed Sheeran Dive. He did it live. He brought Ed Sheeran out on stage, and that was the only song he'd react to, but it had to be the cover by Luke Combs. It was the only thing he reacted to. He'd react slightly to our voices, but more to that song. So every day then, until he got woken up, we sat there and played that song to him on repeat on his chest, right next to his ear. And he'd flutter his eyes, he'd stir, he'd try and move and stuff like that. Then the day before they woke him up, they'd lightened the sedation very light, to the point where he was opening his eyes. The main issue people have with being woken up from a coma is they bite down on the tube that's still in their mouth, because when they're when they're woken up, I don't know the medical terms, but when they are woken up, your first instinct is to bite down on the thing that's shoved down your throat. But if you don't fight the tube, they will take it out, but you have to ask for them to take it out so they know that you're ready. They tried to wake him up a few times prior to that, and he kept biting down on the tube, so they knew he wasn't ready. Then, as he was stirring, me and Nikki said to him, "You don't bite down on that fucking tube tomorrow," when they tried to wake you up. And he didn't. We went in. He was awake. I don't believe they'd actually FaceTimed us that time. And we'd just gone in the next morning and he was awake. He still had all of his feeding tubes and obviously cannulas here, there and everywhere. But he was awake, and that was on the 6th day. 6th or the 7th day that he fought and stayed awake. So then they moved him to, I think they give it a day or two just to make sure that he was fully stabilised to be out of ICU. And then they transferred him to an infectious ward. It's still in Stoke. It was in the basement. It was like going from a brand new spanking hospital to the basement. It was absolutely awful. The change in, they had Dyson fans in the ICU and he had one right behind him. And then when he went down to the infectious ward, it was so hot in there. It was absolutely awful. But because it was an infectious ward and he was also on a COVID ward, he wasn't allowed to have a fan in his room. The windows didn't open. I don't even think, because in some of the rooms they had like little vents that you almost open at the top of a window. He didn't even have that. It was just awful in there. So Nikki bought him her little desk fan, and he had that. I think he'd been in there about 2 days, and that's when his hallucinations, what we had seen, had started. We'd walk in and he'd be like sat in bed jamming and singing Baggy Trousers, talking about Sister Act. He'd be telling us all of the stories that had happened and all of the missions that he'd gone on. And that's when we knew, like, we were starting to speak to his doctors then, like, is this normal? Is it normal? Is it because of the meningitis? Is it because of the coma? And they said it's a bit of both, because his temperature was still so high. They said it is a side effect of the meningitis.
Basically, when I'd come out of the coma and kind of come round to myself, I was just like imagining weird things, like hallucinating and actually visually seeing things that other people weren't, if that makes sense. I could remember the bed opposite me. There was a bloke that had, he was quite a large bloke. He had like almost two bays to himself, and he had like all these emojis on the wall that like the nurses were smacking, and then like gloves and aprons would come out of the emoji faces and stuff. And then for some reason I thought that they'd like amputated his arms, like his hands, and they attached like a mechanical claw to one arm, and then the other arm he had like a Ferris wheel attached to his hand. And because he was like sedated, he was almost like talking through like a computer as such. And he kept, like, all I can imagine he kept singing was the McDonald's theme tune. So it just, like, that was just like one of many hallucinations. Like, I thought especially when I was in critical care, it was really bad. Every time I'd like close my eyes to go to sleep, I'd always think I was like driving a tractor out of a river or something. Or it was like I thought I was flying a space shuttle. Like at the top, I was going up to the top of the hospital, and every time I closed my eyes, a little screen would appear, and I'd put a location, like a postcode or something, and a date, like a time and date, and it'd fly me back to that time and date or something. So I managed to I remember I flew back to like the first night I met. Anna had stayed at mine the first night, and then she was staying at a friend's while I was in critical care and stuff. And I flew to their house, and like I imagined it was like something out like Star Wars, like this little drone was flying, and then like I'd come out like a hologram, and like, I was able to talk to them and whatnot. It was bizarre. It really was bizarre, and I thought I thought I was just in a hospital bed, but I was just in like the middle of the streets. Like it was all. The only way I can explain it is like American streets around like the back of buildings and stuff. And my mum and my sister was there, and I was really hallucinating. I thought like my sister was being attacked by like an orangutan and something. It was bizarre, honestly. And then it was like every night I tried to close my eyes, I'd see something different. I mean, I think it was Good Friday. I think it was Easter weekend. I was certain that like Craig David was performing at the hospital, but it was like all the floor was glass and everything, and I could see like through the floor that Craig David was below performing and stuff, and I was like dancing in bed and everything, and yeah, it was just bizarre. It really was. It was mad.
And that went on for about 2 weeks, his hallucinations. The most heartbreaking one was when me and Nikki sat either side of his bed every single day, and he looked at me and he just said, he was like, "Who the fuck is that?" And I was like, "Tom, that's your mum, don't be so silly." And, played it off. And Nikki, really upset Nikki.
That day when he asked who I was, that nearly broke that. Well, it did break my heart that day. So
it was really hard because it was very quick conversations to hang up on me. And then he called me back again 5 minutes later, and he wasn't crying, he was almost just sobbing. And I was like, "What's wrong? You okay?" And he was like, I'm really hurting." He was like, "They've told me I've got gravel rash." I didn't know what gravel rash was, so I automatically thought, "Oh my God, he's got another flipping disease. Like, he's caught something being on an infectious ward." So I quickly Googled gravel rash, and it is something if you come off a bike, so you've got all gravel rash. I didn't know that. And I was like, "What have you got that from? You've not been outside." And he said, "The paramedics come and got me, told me that I was moving rooms, but it was the paramedics that had picked me up on the side of the road at my accident." So he was somewhat aware of his accident, but I think that was from like what we had tried to tell him, going through that hallucination stage. And he said to me, "The paramedics have picked me up." He said, "But they didn't put me in the back of the ambulance. They chained me to the bottom bar and dragged me around the hospital car park." So his hallucinations were really funny up until the point that they were hurting him. That was the only one that I'd got, but I think that he'd phoned my mum and said that someone had come in and hurt him as well. So again, they were funny up until that point. And then that day I'd come home. I got home about 6 o'clock in the morning because I needed to clean the fish tank. Had a shower, and just his friend turned up, and I just completely broke down. I was like, "I don't know how much more of these hallucinations I can take."
But even on like more the horrible side of it, like I generally forgot who my mum was. Like she was sat next to me. I had my mum one side and Anna the other side, and I turned to Anna and asked like, "Who's that?" And like the fact that I forgot my mum for a minute was devastating. It was horrible, and it really upset her as well.
So I was the first one who went in to see him, and I don't want to get upset. To me, Thomas is special. Thomas is a twin. So, and I'd miscarried before I had Thomas, because I told me I might not be able to have children. So he was a twin, and I lost the twin. So he's always been my special boy. So I said I wouldn't get upset to this, but yeah, just to see him lying there with all the tubes and everything. And I thought he was going to die. Really thought he was going to die. Felt the lump on his head, and yeah, I didn't cry. Thought I couldn't cry, couldn't get upset. There was police in the room there. Doctors were in there explaining, and they basically said they suspected meningitis more or less straight away. So they said what was going to happen. They were going to have these tests. They mentioned about the bleed on the brain. A lot of it was a blur. All I kept thinking was, he ain't going to make it, he ain't going to make it. I thought he was going to die. And then it just seemed like forever, and the next minute everybody started coming in. Anna came in, Victoria come in. I was holding it together and everything, just stroking his head and talking to him, and it was like, it was very, very surreal at the time. Then they were saying, like, we can't have anybody in, it's just direct family. And then Victoria come in, Victoria went out, and then Victoria was bringing everybody in, weren't she? And she got, it's his brother, it's his sister, they're all family. So, you know, Victoria's backwards and forwards bringing people in. And it wasn't until Tom Humphries came in, which is Thomas's best mate, I broke down because he started crying, and to see him cry, because Tom's like my second son. He's always been my adopted son. I've got adopted children. So, yeah, I sort of had to turn and face the wall because I got really emotional at that point. But, yeah, it was very traumatic seeing him like that.
He slept 18 hours and came out of his hallucination straight away, like nothing had happened. It was so strange, so bizarre. He just slept for 18 hours and come out of it. He was like, we walked in and he was like, I've got jacket potato, cheese and beans for dinner. And we were like, okay, like, this is all you've eaten at Stoke, so... Oh, and we were like carrying on with the conversations and stuff like that. And like I think I looked at Nicky and I was just like, he's back. Like that. But he kind of had a few moments where he'd come round anyway. So we didn't, you know, we kind of just let it be as it was. And then we'd gone in the next day and he was the same. And we were like, no, he's back. Like, the hallucinations have stopped now. And all it took was 18 hours sleep. He clearly needed it. So then once they'd done that and tried to control his temperature a little bit and the hallucinations stopped, we were then starting the process. This was about 2 weeks into Stoke. About 2.5 weeks into Stoke. And we were like, we need to get him transferred to Birmingham because, you know, this travelling is rinsing our, you know, bank accounts. Parking was awful. Fuel was awful. So we pushed for the transfer then, and we were asking them every single day. And I think it was 3 days continuously we were nagging at the doctors to transfer him to the QE. But they just kept saying to us, we need to wait for a bed available, you know, whether it be, he doesn't necessarily need to go on an infectious ward because he's finished his antibiotics now. He can just go on to any ward there, but we just need to wait for a bed. So then the bed finally come available. They didn't say what ward he was going on to or anything. So they moved him. That night he was moved. We then was kind of in talks with the QE about how does visiting work, because again, it's still COVID, you know, there's COVID cases on every single ward in every single hospital. So like, you know, as long as you're showing a negative test, both of you, because he was in his own room again, both of you are more than welcome to come and see him. So I think it was for the first week while he was there, me and Nicky were just going up. We were the only two that were allowed for the whole hospital stay. It was only ever us to reduce rate of infection. So then for about a week, we just went and sat in his room with him, and he was put on a diabetic ward at the QE, which we understood, you know, we just wanted him transferred. That was the only bed that they had available. It was understandable for a short period of time. I can't remember how long he was on there, probably 2 weeks. 2 weeks. But that ward was just absolutely diabolical. It was absolutely awful. The staff there were absolutely dreadful. I know that Nicky's currently going through a complaint with the hospital because of the state that they left him in. The only thing that he ever did there was, you know, it was, here's your lunch, here's your tablets, see you later. So your spinal fluid should be anywhere between 25 and 30 at a maximum. Thomas's was 40, which is very bad. So that's when they kind of knew that they needed to put a spinal drain in, and then eventually go on to possibly do a VP shunt, which is the surgery he had, if this drain didn't work. So they scheduled him for surgery. I think I just walked through the door and he texted me saying, I'm back on the ward now. And I was like, right, okay, that was quick. By the time I'd obviously got down, took some of his stuff, got to the car park and stuff, I think he was probably in there for like 45 minutes, not even that. And then he was in and out and back on his ward. So the neuro ward in the QE, they were absolutely amazing. Cannot thank them enough for everything that they did for him mentally, physically. You know, at the end of the day, you say it's just their job, but they kept him going while he was in there. We were only allowed in there for a few hours a day. So, they were absolutely amazing. That was the best but the worst part of his hospital stay, the neuro ward, because it was a very long waiting game, because he was only meant to have the VP shunt, the draining for, I think it was like a few days. It ended up being weeks, because he'd gone from having so much freedom as well. As bad as the diabetic ward was, we were allowed to take him out. So, he came home for a few hours. We went and sat and had picnics out on the grass at the hospital. Friends and family came, and it was great to being confined to a ward, because he has to have a nurse with him 24/7. He can't go out without them because they've got to monitor his drain. That was the hardest part, as well as waiting for the surgery. But then, as I said, the staff were absolutely amazing. But then he had the surgery and he was out the next day. And it was absolutely mad. So, yeah. I can't remember the exact words, but it's called a VP shunt. No, I can't remember. It starts with H, I think. So, the drain that he had in his back is basically like an outer one of... It's an outer one of those. So, it's a tiny little... How the nurse explained it to me was, when you're having antibiotics for a drip, the plastic little thing where it drips, it's basically a micro one of those in his brain. So he has that. So he's got 2 incisions. He's got one at the front of his head and the one at the back of his head. The one at the back of his head is the mechanical valve, so they can adjust the flow. So he's got a mechanical valve at the back, but it runs from the front of his head all the way down his neck and into his stomach, and it drains the fluid for him. So like mine and your body, where our body automatically drains that fluid into our bloodstream, his doesn't. So he had to have a mechanical valve and a tube to kind of help him out with that. So that was the surgery that we were waiting for, and he finally had.
Like, while I was in hospital, it didn't seem, for some reason, I didn't really have any like financial worry as such. But as soon as I come out, I thought, I'm not going to be going back to work for a period of time. And that's when like the financial things and the stress and the worry set in massively. Was, how are we going to afford to keep the house? At the end of the day, we've got nowhere else to go as such, This is our house, we've worked hard for it. We need to do whatever we can to keep the house running. And that was a massive stress, massive factor in it really, was financially. I'd say when I come out of hospital, I thought, it won't be long, like, I'll be back on my feet, I'll be able to do stuff. And then, weeks go by, a month goes by, and I didn't feel like I was progressing as much as I thought I was. And it made me realise then that it's a lot worse than I thought it was. It's not just like breaking your butt, like breaking an arm or something, and they go 6 to 8 weeks, you'll be back to yourself. Like, it's just, every time I've seen a consultant or one of my doctors or something, they've always said, how long's a piece of string? The road could be so, I might not even make a full 100% recovery to what I used to be. So, yeah, to hear that is, it is heartbreaking as such, because I'm still young, I want to live my life and stuff, and as I just landed my dream job, I was enjoying, I really was. We were at a point in life where we were really happy with what we've achieved, and something like that just knocks us down massively. But like I say, just the main thing for us was keeping the house running, like, we've always worried about money and finances and stuff. But yeah, we just had to learn to live with losing luxuries as such. We had to get rid of the cars and whatnot, just to be able to afford to have the you know what I mean, keep the house running and whatnot, and realising as such as a couple that we're not, I can't really put a time frame on when I'm going to go back to work, or if I can return to the sort of job I was doing. So it's a stressful thing, and it really does. It's always there in the back of your mind of how you're going to cope for the next 3 months. You know what I mean? We sold everything. We tried cutting all the bills down and everything to make it as affordable as possible, just on one wage. You know what I mean? Only Anna's the one that's bringing income now. I mean, I get sick pay. It's not a lot. I mean, we're still down money each month, so luckily we've sold the cars and consolidated other, you know what I mean, finances and stuff to try and make our money, what we've got, last as long as possible, because we don't know when I'll be returning to work. I mean, I'm getting frustrated and I want to get back to work, but I'm getting better, but there's still so much to go through, and the progression of recovering and stuff, it's endless, it really is, and realising how long it actually take, it does get frustrating, it really does. They did tell me I'd lose my licence for having because I had a seizure a couple of days before the surgery. They said you will lose your licence due to that. But yeah, I'm guessing they're consolidating with all my consultants and stuff. I don't know what's going on. It's frustrating because I wanna go back to my company and say, look, I've lost my licence. Is there anything I can do within the company to stay with the company? Because like I said, the company's amazing to work for. I've never worked for a company that's so supportive and whatnot. And being such a small, like, family-run business, you don't just feel like a number. You feel like an actual member of the team, member of the family as such. So, like, if I lose my licence and they can't help me with anything in that aspect, it'll kill me to leave the company. It really would. Again, financially, I was selling all my stuff from my truck because I put a set of curtains in it, set of mats and whatnot. I made it my own. I ended up selling the mats and the curtains and whatnot to get a bit of money back to the lad that's now driving it, and he looks after it just as much as I did. So we went down there so I can give him the curtains and the mats and whatnot. And when I got there, they'd done like a pimp my ride scene on the garage workshop door. They like banged the workshop door, the shutter come up, and out rolled one of the driver's wives on a little mobility scooter that they all chipped in and bought for me to help me get around and be a bit more independent. They'd all blinged it up with truck lights and put a Scania mud flap on it. They put the reg of my truck on the back of it as well. They also painted it in the company colours as well, so it was really like a sentimental thing for me, and the support they'd give me. They also handed us a card with quite a big lump sum of cash in it to help us just get by for the next couple of months. They said to us they didn't want us to spend it on bills and such, just treat yourself and try as much as you can live a normal life as such for the time being, while you're off work and whatnot. But again, they've been nothing but supportive. They really are a good company and a good group of people to be around.
When they said it was meningitis, we were confused as to, as an adult, ideally, it's very rare for adults to get meningitis, or what I thought anyway. The main things that, the only thing that I knew to look out for in meningitis was a rash, where you hold a glass over the rash, and if it shows it's meningitis, if it doesn't, it's just a normal rash. That was the only thing I ever knew to look out for. So when they said that, we were confused, and we were trying for ages to understand as to why he could have got that. When we spoke to the doctor, they said that you've got your catchers and your carriers, same as colds. So Thomas was a carrier of meningitis, and it sits in a cavity in your nose, and it's activated from a head injury. So in September, when we bought the house last year, he had a bit of a funny spell, and fainted in the bathroom and hit his head off the radiator, it caused a tiny fracture in his skull. Nothing for them to be concerned about, but that's when the meningitis was activated. It had gone from the cavity in his nose into this fracture in his skull and embedded into his brain, basically. And then it took from September to April. They said somewhere in between him smacking his head to April, he may not have felt unwell, but his immune system was compromised and the meningitis took over. And that's how it happened. So
I say losing my hearing to meningitis, it was a bit bizarre at first, because say like when I come out of the coma, I could still hear everyone, have conversation with everyone. So it wasn't until like 2-3 weeks in, I started to struggle with my hearing, like couldn't hear people properly, or I'd have to like have the telly on in my room and have it at like 100, the volume at 100, like. So I thought something's not right here, something's going on. So I had further like hearing tests and stuff, and it was just bizarre that like I'd lost my hearing within like 2 days. I had one hearing test. They said, "Oh, you've got you got damage to both cochlears in your brain," and then 2 days later, I couldn't hear at all out of the one ear. It was really, really worrying. It was the fact that when people talk about life-changing injuries and stuff, and being deaf is life-changing, because the worrying thing for me was like not being able to hear like Anna's voice again, or my mum's voice again, or be able to have a conversation with somebody. I mean, whether it's friends, family, complete strangers. I mean, it really hit home, and in a way, I'm lucky that I didn't lose any sort of limbs from the meningitis. But then again, I've lost my hearing, so it's a massive loss. It really is, but I mean, I think I'd choose losing my hearing over a limb, or even my eyesight as such, because again, that emotional attachment to somebody. For instance, if I couldn't be able to hear Anna or my mum or my sister and my family and whatnot and my friends, like it'd never be the same again. It wouldn't feel the same again. It really wouldn't. And it opens your eyes. It really does, to, again, the way it's changed my life, to not take things for granted as such. You know what I mean? Just being here today, trying to live a normal life is massive, really. From what I've been told and whatnot, what the doctors and the nurses have told Anna and my mum, that the crash had almost saved me life, because if I'd come home and just gone to bed feeling unwell, the way meningitis attacks, you know what I mean, your body and your brain and your nervous system and your limbs and stuff, they said that I could have been worse off. I could have gone to sleep and possibly not woken up. I could have been seriously brain damaged and whatnot. So almost getting into a crash was horrible and horrific, but potentially a doctor and a nurse had picked up on those meningitis symptoms and the fever-like symptoms and saved me before it had got any worse. So yeah, I mean, I can't really remember anything from the crash, but you could say it saved me life as such, but it's a blessing in disguise, I guess.
I think my main concern is that, when it comes to like his physiotherapy and appointments, because I'm at work, I'm not there, and I feel bad for that, because it's his mom that is having to go with every single one, and I know she'd do it. She doesn't ask or question it at all. She'd go, but I feel bad for not being able to go. It's not like you can get a hospital appointment on a Saturday or a Sunday, but if I don't go to work, the bills aren't paid. So that's one of my concerns. Like, not so much a concern, but like a guilt as such. But it's nothing that I can do about it. Nothing that no one can do about it. That's just kind of how that makes me feel. Concerns as such, he needs to start doing his exercises that he's being told to do by the physiotherapist at home. But he's walking a lot better. He doesn't feel like he'd made such a big progress, but he has. He's done amazingly. So, you know, he is walking with just his stick at the moment. Even if his legs are tired and he's moaning at me, he's carrying on and he's still walking. So I think with his mobility recovery, he, you know, eventually he will be back on top form and 100%. I think it's more, as he explains, as Jellyhead. I think that probably will take a little bit more time. And with how frustrated he is already, he needs to just know that he needs to give it more time. But other than that, I don't think I really have. And it's just time that he needs to give himself. You know, he can't continue to push himself continuously as hard as he is, because he is going to burn himself out. But no, he's doing really, really well.
It's more how it's affecting him mentally, not physically now. Because I can see he's getting better physically, but it's just that light in his eyes isn't the same. That sounds bad to say that, but that spark in his eyes is not the same as what it was.
It's going to be a long road of recovery for Tom. The unity of his friends, family, and especially his fiancée Anna are helping Tom push forward to raise awareness for meningitis. At Platopia, we've designed clothing not only to raise awareness for meningitis, but to honour and support Tom and Anna for their bravery. 100% of the profit from the Tom and Anna collection will go towards supporting this fantastic pair.